AutoVision News live at AutoSens. We are here in Detroit at the Michigan Science Center for what has been an exciting week of ADAS and automotive thought leadership. Now, AutoSens is a best-in-class event that brings together the ADAS community, and the industry experts that you see and meet here at AutoSens are helping shape the future of mobility. One such expert joining us today is Harvey Weinberg. Now, he's been a practicing engineer for over 35 years. He's currently the director of sensing technologies at Microtech Ventures. Now, prior to this, he spent time at Analog Devices for about 25 years, where he held multiple roles, most recently as an automotive division technologist. Now, he worked there on early sensor technology development. Harvey has 14 U.S. patents awarded in various fields, including air velocity measurement, sensor self-testing, and LiDAR. Joining us today on AutoVision News Live at AutoSens, Harvey, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, Harvey, let's kind of dive in here. I know some of your colleagues at Microtech Ventures. It's the first time we've met, so it's a pleasure. So tell us about the work that you do with Microtech Ventures.
Sure. So Microtech is a small boutique investment firm. We basically do merger and acquisition projects, market research, technology evaluation, startup due diligence, and we also put on some workshops and seminars as well.
Yes, absolutely. And you do fantastic workshops and seminars as well. I work with your colleague Jessica on some of those, as well as for media partnerships. So we love that. Let me pick your brain on LiDAR for a second.
Sure
so
thing.
what are the trends what are the important trends we're seeing right now in the LiDAR space?
Well, there's 75 LiDAR companies out there now.
Yeah.
Everybody's trying to find their thing.
Sure.
So I think one of the key trends that you're seeing now is that people are trying to deliver on what the OEMs actually want, which is a product that they can afford, that they can integrate into their car, something that's going to give them the performance that they need.
Sure.
Which, generally my advocacy is that you want to have something like 0.1 degree angular resolution. And mainly that's to be able to pick up things like road debris at a long distance.
Right.
Something that currently radar is just not capable of doing, and cameras obviously, particularly at night, can't really do.
Yeah.
So reliability, manufacturability, can you integrate it into your car? Those are the things I think that are trending mostly right now.
Sure. Software-defined cars, huge topic of discussion, not just at AutoSens, but across the entire industry.
Absolutely.
What is the relationship between LiDAR and software-defined cars?
So, I think it's fair to say that it doesn't matter how you architect your car. Your outcomes are not going to be any better than the sensor input that you get from it.
Sure.
If you get bad image data from your camera or bad perception data from your radar or LiDAR system, you're not going to be able to do a good job of control.
Right.
So in that respect, the software definition architecture of the car doesn't really play so much into the sensor space. I think it is natural to have sensors that can have their software updated.
Sure.
Simply because how it is over time. You release a product, you improve things, and you want to get the best possible performance out of the hardware.
Yes.
So in the sensor space anyways, software plays, in my view, a much smaller role.
Sure.
Because a lot of it depends upon the physics of the perception mechanism itself.
Okay.
And that's not really changeable once your hardware is in there. It's already cast in stone.
Sure. Harvey, let me get your perspective, LiDAR and trucking.
Mm-hmm.
And from your perspective as an engineer, the engineering challenges, if you have LiDAR on a sedan or a crossover, but then you go to trucks much larger, what are the engineering challenges when you're putting LiDAR on a large, heavy vehicle like that?
So for LiDAR, I think the main challenge really is, for trucks specifically, the real challenge is range.
Sure.
You have a much larger vehicle. It takes a lot longer to maneuver or stop.
Right.
And so in the context of a car, you need to be able to see, perhaps 200, 250 meters away. Excuse me. You get to a truck, 400, 500 meters, 600 meters, in order to be able to stop or have smooth control to change lanes, what have you.
Absolutely.
And that's a challenge for lots of LiDAR sensing modalities. So for example, if you're operating at 900 nanometers, which is very standard.
Sure.
There's a limit to the amount of power you can put out because of eye safety constraints.
Yeah, right.
And as a result of that power limit, there's usually a range limit that goes along with that as well.
Sure.
So I think that what you see for the trucking industry where they can tolerate higher prices too, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those guys, I think, are going to tend towards going to 1550 nanometers,
Yeah.
where there aren't any eye safety concerns. Essentially,
Mhm.
you can put out 3 orders of magnitude more power than
Yes.
you can at 900.
Yes.
So that's one of the ways that they'll get their range. Also, I believe a lot of them will move towards frequency modulated continuous wave, FMCW modulation, which is what all radar systems do nowadays. For 2 reasons: for an improvement in performance, because there are I won't get into it because it's a big technical discussion, but there are ways to get much better performance out of FMCW than direct detection.
Sure.
And but it costs. It usually costs money, not some other engineering thing.
Yeah, right.
And the trucking guys, they can swallow it, right? Because you're spending $250,000 on a tractor trailer anyways.
Yes.
Another $1,000 for the sensor is probably not going to kill them.
Right, drop in the bucket kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the magic word radar, and I want to read just a portion from the AutoSens Inside magazine here that we have at a number of the tables around the Michigan Science Center. So Harvey was in an article in the magazine here predicting the future of radar, the magic sensor. Now, Harvey, you were asked here, what interests you the most about recent radar developments? Harvey, here's your response, and for our viewers from Harvey. Considering that radar in general is almost 100 years old and automotive radar is over 50 years old, I find it fascinating that new developments continue to spring up. Even more interesting is that there is innovation happening in almost every part of the radar ecosystem. Everything from highly integrated chipsets built to accommodate expansion to novel antennas to algorithms that improve angular resolution and coexistence. So, Harvey, let's talk about that. We seem to kind of maybe forget about LiDAR, or excuse me, we forget about radar with all the attention on LiDAR, but radar is important. So let's get your perspective on what I just read there.
Sure. So first off, I just want to point out that I think radar is indispensable in ADAS and autonomous driving, simply because of its ability to handle bad weather.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's foggy or snowy. Generally, these things don't bother radar at all. Whereas all the other sensing modalities, cameras and LiDAR, do struggle a bit with bad weather.
Sure.
But that said, for a long time, like, I don't know, somewhere in the early 2010s until maybe last year, 2 years ago, the OEMs and tier ones were like just purely focused on make it cheaper, make it smaller. The performance is whatever the performance is, and it kind of doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I believe that at least until a few years ago, everybody had this idea that LiDAR was just going to, eat the world. Everything was going to be fine because of LiDAR. It's got that great angular resolution, and that's going to solve all of those problems.
Sure.
But I think what people didn't realize at the time, maybe they ate up the hype, I don't know, but there's still the issue about what happens if it's raining or snowing or it's a dusty environment or anything like that. Sure. And that's where radar truly excels. So now people have started to refocus their attention on radar. And as a result, there are some very, very cool innovations happening in radar in just about every part of the signal chain.
Right.
And it's really fascinating that after 100 years of radar development and 50 years of automotive radar development, that they're still managing to find ways to improve performance of radar by order of magnitude kind of thing. These are not incremental improvements. These are, one would expect that in mature technology you'd see some incremental types of improvements.
Yes. Right.
These are order of magnitude kind of improvements. It's really quite exciting. I think it's an interesting time to be in that space.
It is really.
And by the way, I'm not selling LiDAR short. LiDAR's got its place.
Totally.
But it's really cool that radar is still able to find new things.
Right. And and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the layered approach is good. You've got LiDAR, you've got cameras, you've got radar, because there's no such thing as a super sensor to do it all.
Right.
You have this layered and tiered approach to compensate if one sensor is deficient or not good at it. Like you said, the weather, radar picks up the slack, right? It seems like that layered approach is a good way to go.
I don't think there's any other way to go.
Right.
You look at every one of the sensing modalities, and there's something or other about them that differentiate them from their peers.
Yeah.
I'll give you a really simple example.
Please.
Is that traffic light? Is that a red light or a yellow light? Your radar doesn't know.
Radar doesn't know.
And your LiDAR doesn't know.
Right.
The only thing that's going to know is your camera.
Good point.
We've built the world around us, our perception mechanisms,
Yes.
our auditory and visual.
Yes, right.
So you got to be able to pick up the stuff that's happening in the visible light spectrum in order to see all the things that we've put together to make the world work for people.
Right.
Every sign on the road is visual. It's traffic lights,
Right.
what have you. So you can't get away without a camera. All right. Well, radar.
Yeah.
You can't really get away without radar either, because if you want to see through fog or snow or rain or night for that matter. I mean,
Yes.
camera's not very good at night.
Right.
Now, one might argue that you could use an infrared camera and that helps.
Yes.
The infrared camera is monochrome. It doesn't help you with your traffic lights. So you're
Right.
back to having the visual,
Right.
the visual light camera.
Yeah.
The radar is great in the bad weather. Okay, you got to have the radar. It
Yes.
doesn't have the angular resolution that LiDAR does.
Right.
Angular resolution is important because I want to see if there's some debris that I
Yes.
can't drive over
Yes.
100 meters away. I'm
Right.
on the highway. I'm going 30 meters a second.
Right.
I've only got 3 seconds to make that decision. So I got to be able to see that tire or that cement block or
Yes.
that other piece of debris that's in the road.
Yes.
I got to see it 100 meters away. Well,
Right.
radar's not doing that.
Right.
Not today.
Right.
Maybe in a decade. I don't know.
Sure.
Camera's certainly not doing it. Definitely at night not doing
Yeah.
it.
Right. Right.
So you need all these different sensing modalities.
Agreed.
And
Yes.
they all kind of lean on each other. And I don't think industry's found any other way to do it.
Right. Right. And I love hearing your perspective on radar, in sort of maybe different applications, but I catch myself, reading about the differences between X band and K bands and KA bands. And I'm sort of a radar enthusiast, I guess, and so I always just really enjoy, I know like the blind spot monitoring systems, don't quote me on this, but I believe they use a K band or some, variation of that. But I just find the topic so interesting.
Yeah, I think blind spot monitoring is almost all moving over to 77 gigahertz.
Okay.
Simply because the semiconductor manufacturers have figured out how to get RF CMOS working at 77 gigahertz.
Right.
So there's not much cost penalty anymore.
Sure.
Versus 24 gigahertz.
Right.
And at 77 gigahertz, the antennas are a lot smaller.
Right.
So you can make a more compact assembly, hide it in your
Yeah.
car somewhere a little bit better. So I think, if they're not already all at 77 gigahertz, within the next few years, they'll all be at 77.
I really dove into this. And so I was glad to read that article because I found myself, a few months ago kind of reading about radar and how it was developed. And then, so I kind of, went down the rabbit hole. So I want to read up on more radar stuff. But before you go, Harvey, before we let you get back to your busy day, let's talk about your patents.
Okay.
How did you come up with them? What was your inspiration? Kind of take us through that process.
So, most of my patents came about because I was working on some problem for another, and I just spent a lot of time thinking about bad solutions to them.
Yeah, right.
It's one bad solution after the other. And then usually the idea that's at the root of the patent usually comes to me when I'm not working on that problem. I've taken a break from it because it's not working out for me.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm helping a colleague out on some other problem.
Sure.
And then something will set it off, and I'll go, hey, I bet I could do whatever.
Yeah.
And then usually the first one of those is not very good, but eventually something will come up, and half the time it's in the shower. So
yeah, right.
Whatever.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, but I mean, I'll give you one example. I have a patent on a LiDAR signal conditioning system, and we had a client back when I was at Analog Devices.
Sure.
And they were looking for this system on chip, and they had sent us a suggested architecture.
Right.
And I thought, this is crazy. This is not a scalable solution.
Right.
We might be able to do what they're asking for today, but 2 years from now, 3 years from now, they're going to ask us to double the number of channels or quadruple the number of channels.
Right.
And it's just not scalable.
Yeah.
It's going to be a monstrosity. So I couldn't come up with a better idea for a while.
Yeah.
And then one of my colleagues is working on an audio problem on doing some noise cancellation system in the car.
Yeah.
And he's talking about a switch capacitor filter.
Sure.
And then he just says something about the switch capacitor filter, and I think, wait a minute. If I took a switch capacitor filter architecture and inverted it, I could use it to drive the front end architecture of this A to D converter, and that was like the root of the whole thing. It had nothing to do with what he was working on.
Right.
But in the process of just helping him work out some other project,
Yep.
something just came up. That's usually how they come up.
Usually how it goes. You know, I had an instructor in college, my calculus instructor, and I would work at the board in his office hours. I get so frustrated, and he'd say, you got to step away, and he'd say, you got to let it percolate. He goes, it's going to come. He goes, you got to sleep on it. You got to get involved doing something else. He's like, and that knowledge is going to come back. You know, that problem solving is going to come back.
Right.
And I do think that is how it works. So, Harvey, want to thank you for your time. Thank you for stopping by our AutoVision News desk today, and thank you for your thought leadership. We want to wish you all the best of luck going forward, and thank you again for coming by.
Thank you, Carl.